Okay, recording. So, welcome everyone to Parkour Coach Companion with me, Sam Kopak. This is episode number 13, and this one is going to be a bit different. This one is going to be a guide, hopefully, for any up and coming coaches or actually people that are just doing parkour and want to get involved in coaching. This is going to be a guide in where to start, who to contact, and all the stuff you need to know, hopefully. So today, to help me with that, I have got my guest, Chris Grant. Welcome, Chris.
Hello, hello. Good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
You're very, very welcome. So I've been wanting to do this for a while, and I thought Chris would be a great guest to have on to fire loads of questions at. So yeah, hopefully we can glean a lot out of you today.
Hopefully.
But first of all, yeah, how you doing, man? What are you up to at the moment? And yeah, all that.
I'm good. I think when we spoke to set this up, it was pouring in Glasgow. It's now sunny, so it'll probably be raining again by the time we finish this podcast. But there has been a window of the big golden thing in the sky that we don't get very often in Scotland. So I'm good. Yeah, things are cool. I started as development manager for Parkour UK about 6-7 weeks ago now, and before that, just a history of parkour coaching. So it's kind of good to be in the thick of it, but in a totally different way now. So all is well. Surviving lockdown like everyone else.
Good, good, yeah. Well, I know there's been quite a big shuffle up with Parkour UK, so that's something we can talk about. But yeah, let's start with these questions then. So, essentially, if someone's listening who has never done any coaching before, um, who should they contact? Where's the first place to start if you want to get involved? You want to get qualified, perhaps as a coach. Where's the best place to start?
So I think there's a couple of almost caveats or like starting points before you even start, which is it's really important to acknowledge that being a good practitioner and being a good coach might not be the same thing. So there's something about starting from a position of assuming you know nothing is really helpful. And obviously your experience with parkour probably plays into it, but if you're new to coaching, assume that it's something you're new to. And I think, the chances are if someone's inspired to be a coach, they've already got some role models around them. So I think another part of that caveat at the beginning is to try and get yourself around people, maybe at a local parkour gym or class that can kind of mentor you and support you on the journey. And then from the sort of more, I guess, official, formal, technical side of it, Parkour UK delivers and administers the qualifications in the UK. So you can jump on our website, which is just parkour.uk, and hit the qualifications tab. And there's loads of information. In some ways, there's kind of too much information, but there's plenty there. So I guess that's like the ground zero starting point.
Mm-hmm. And where can qualifications take you? I mean, I know that there's different levels. So for someone that doesn't understand these levels at all, can you explain a bit about how they differ and what they are?
So, I mean, I think the qualifications as a whole, I guess it serves two large purposes, right? So the first one is for you to learn and get better at something, right? The same as any other qualification. So, and we'll talk about the levels of that. So if you want to become a coach, it makes sense to some extent to formalize your learning, maybe alongside like practicing with role models and stuff. The other really, really important part of the qualifications, and this has certainly evolved a lot since the days of just pretending that you kind of knew what you were doing in 2008 and teaching people without any real knowledge, is the legitimacy side of it. So, the same as if you're a plumber or an electrician or an academic, there are pieces of paper that have credibility that show evidence of your competence, right? And that obviously goes a long way to you progressing your career and having clients that are willing to take you on as a coach. So I guess those are the two big hitters. Those are the two big boxes that we tick. In terms of the levels, we currently have two levels plus a tutor. So starting from the top, the tutor's job is to deliver the other two qualifications, right? So they're a coach of coaches, which is like another layer again, right? And then underneath that, we have the level one, which is like an assistant coaching position. So that's the starting point for someone. So if you'd like to become a coach, you can come on one of those courses. go through the course, and I'm sure we'll get into the details of what that looks like. And at the end of it, that would put you in a position to become an assistant coach under level 2. Again, that's a kind of standard framework that you would get within most coaching models in other sports as well. And then the level 2 is, on the certificate, it's just coach. I guess we call it full coach, right, to differentiate it from assistant. And that's where you would learn a lot more in depth about coaching, about the techniques you use, and then probably also start to consider a lot more about designing programs and managing larger groups and how you would work with assistant coaches. And that's the kind of full capacity level where essentially under those qualifications, we would say that you're sort of competent to operate as an individual, independently, or within an organisation. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. So the sort of level 3 above level 2 is kind of the coach of coaches.
Yeah, for the moment, and there's been discussion about what a level 3 qualification as a coach might look like. That's not at the top of our list for redesign at the moment, but in other disciplines that we follow the same framework, a level 3 might be someone who then is also learning a bit more about like maybe programming for a whole team or managing a whole cohort of staff. So the level 3, I guess you could think of, if it ever exists, is like a manager of a lot of coaches. Yeah, and then we have the tutors. So the tutors don't technically have like a level beside their name; they just have that different word.
Mm-hmm.
So technical.
And over time, I know that these qualifications have changed.
Yeah.
What can you say about the qualifications where they are now, as opposed to kind of where they were, how they started?
So I think I guess the origins of all parkour qualifications really would start way back with the ADAPT, which was originally the Parkour Generations qualification, right? So back in like 2007 or something, those guys worked with some of the Yamakasi, and they designed a sort of, I guess, an initial starting point of like what would the parkour coach look like. I was really fortunate to be old enough to be around at that time and get involved in some of that stuff. Over time, as Parkour UK developed, we kind of, I guess, diverged from that a wee bit. And where the qualifications are with us now is our question, I guess, was Parkour UK is a national governing body. If we're fitting ourselves into the framework of sport, and not only sport, we know parkour is more than that, but in terms of, you know, the sort of bureaucracy and the legitimacy around what we do, what does a coaching qualification for parkour look like that kind of models the existing framework for, say, I don't know, football, basketball, gymnastics, etc. So I'd say where we're at, you know, time stamping today is that those level 1 and level 2 qualifications, they're probably a little bit tougher than the equivalents in other disciplines that use the same framework. But we're really looking at creating a set of qualifications which lines up with that, which means it's recognised, but develops a parkour coach to the point where they can do all that delivery that we just talked about. And I think there's also a question of making sure that it's still accessible as well, right? So I think the original cohort of people, including myself, that kind of had a hand in what qualifications might have looked at in 2008, we were the only people that wanted to do it, and we'd already been training for ages. So that audience is very different now from the audience of coaches and the workforce that we're trying to create, right? So you might have people like you and I, Sam, who probably fall into a fairly narrow age category. We've probably been practicing for the same amount of time. We're probably quite similar physically, but the makeup of the parkour community is not like that now, right? So we've now got 60-year-olds and teenagers and young people and children. So our qualifications now are looking at being able to build a workforce that's kind of, I guess, spans that whole range of people. And that's where the levels come in, and that's where we're trying to make sure that it has the right level of accessibility while still being difficult enough that, you know, you have to prove that you can do it.
Mm-hmm. And I know there's, from the start, there's been an emphasis on kind of, to be honest, competency. With these qualifications. They're not easy. What sort of, how much experience would you kind of recommend that someone has with training or coaching for the different levels?
So I think first off, it's worth saying that actually the level of competency that you need, particularly at the level 2, is something we're currently reviewing. And again, that comes back to that accessibility thing of how do we strike a balance between making sure that people are good coaches can get into the sport, but also that we don't sort of dilute the purpose of the discipline, right? And I think the general consensus among our members right now would be that our level 2 probably swings too far into the difficulty of the testing. So that's something we're looking at. It's just worth putting that in there. What I would say is the level 1 is very much focused on someone who is not a coach yet, right? So the day 1 of the level 1 is a bit of a like, what do we think parkour is? And that's a discussion, talking about maybe how we describe some of the movements and some of the families of movements, and I guess like a little bit of a parkour specific 101. But the rest of that course is specific to what are the coaching skills required, right? So I would say if you wanted it to be a good journey for you, it would be good to have a little bit of experience in both. But we have had outliers, right? So we've had people who have no parkour experience, but their coaching skills are way up there. So over those 3 days, they can focus on learning about parkour. And then also you don't immediately get your certification over those 3 days. You've then got a level of like self-development and supervision. So they might focus that around parkour competency. Whereas you might have a really experienced practitioner who's never done any coaching, and naturally that's what they really struggle with. So I would say the qualification strikes a balance between those two. At level 2, the competency testing naturally is going to be more difficult. So I think it would be pretty impressive to pass a level 2, regardless of, even if we decide in the long run to change the difficulty of it. If you'd never moved in a parkour fashion, I think you would struggle. And I think there's a natural filtering process that happens anyway there, right? Because if you've done your level 1 and you're teaching people in parkour, even if you were brand new at that point, for you to continue to do that and not be a practitioner would be pretty unusual. But then I think also at the level 2, the coaching skills go up. So in fact, sort of generally speaking and anecdotally speaking, in the last 2 or 3 years, a lot of the places where people have maybe struggled in the assessment has actually been in the coaching skills rather than the competency. So it's definitely a combination of both. That's probably a bit of a massive ambiguous answer, but hopefully that's helpful.
So you've level 1 is your assistant coach, someone that can assist the level 2.
Yeah.
Your level 2 is someone that is a kind of fully qualified coach that can run their own sessions, and level 3 are the tutors that run the courses. And so in the UK, where would you need to go to take any of these qualifications?
Good question. So basically Parkour UK will be putting out like a calendar of courses that we're going to deliver in 2021, and what we'll do initially is look at where is the current demand. So like if you're interested, I guess the first thing for me to say is if you're interested, contact us and tell us, right? So our first port of call is to look at that. They can essentially happen anywhere within the UK. So when we design our calendar for next year, we'll be looking at where is the immediate demand, where are the suitable venues. So level 1 tends to happen indoors. So if people can just imagine a typical indoor venue that you can teach parkour in. So that could be from a school gym all the way up to like, a chain store type custom built space. And the level 2s tend to take place outdoors. Because I think generally there's more of a focus on the practice and the challenges around that. And I think the outdoor environment is quite different. I'm sure you would agree. So if people are interested in taking part, they can have a look on our website at the upcoming courses. We're hoping to release our 2021 calendar by the end of the year. Definitely by the end of the year. I've made that commitment on camera now, so that's good. And then I guess the other side of that is that we are also open to putting on courses if there's enough demand, right? So say you're a level 2 that has a gym in, Dorset. Let's use Scott Jackson. Shout out Scott Jackson as an example. If Scott knows that he's got 5 or 6 coaches, which is the bulk of what we would need to run a course, then we can set one up there and we can fill it with other people. So it's a little bit ad hoc, but we'd really like to get to a place where we have a kind of set calendar for the year. So it's just about keeping an eye on the website for that, really.
Excellent, yeah. And just for those listening, for my personal journey, I'm from York, and when I wanted to do my level 1, I was currently at university in Stoke-on-Trent. Unfortunately, I got some funding from a local YMCA centre, and they helped fund me for my level one. So I went down to London and did level one indoors with Dan Edwards, and then my level two was again down in London, but outside in like the Canada Water area with Chris Keithley. So I had some fantastic experiences on both my qualifications, and I can attest to the level two being hard. But for me, I think there is debate on the sort of the difficulty, and there's quite a lot of debate on the ins and outs of the level two. For the most part, from what I experienced, I actually agree with a lot of it, and I think that it's very well designed and a bloody good challenge. So yeah, but also so you said that the level one is how long is it? Did you say 3 days? Was it?
It's 3 days. We also ask that people have a safeguarding and a first aid qualification. So what we do is we put that on before the course. So like if you're doing that, then it's 4 days. So we're running 2 level ones next week, and they were sort of put on quickly as a bit of a test for me as development manager to kind of get a sense of like the operational stuff that happens behind the scenes. And what we've moved to with that is that you get, if you need to do those 2 prerequisite courses, the safeguarding one is online, and then the first aid one is a whole day. And that just feels like the right weight for us. That's not to say safeguarding isn't important, but I think it's something that you can learn it online and that you'll continue to develop it under the supervision of wherever you're working. Whereas I think the emergency first aid at work qualification that we deliver is a big piece of paper for your CV as well. So that every job I have ever done outside of parkour, they have asked people to be on that. So for us, there's something about doing it that way also just empowers our workforce to be doing other stuff. So yeah, it's 4 days or 3 days, just depending on whether you need those extra pieces.
And what do the assessments entail then? Could you break down kind of what the assessments is like for level one and level two?
Sure. So level one, you do your 2 days of like training, learning, which is a mix of parkour practice and coaches development. And then the third day, essentially what you do is you do a supervised delivery of a short session, all right? And you tend, as you know, Sam, you tend to do that with the people that are on your course, which is a really lovely but slightly weird experience, right? Because a lot of people going to level one are going to walk away and probably teach kids classes, right? Just as an example, not exclusively. And actually, there's something strange about these people that you've spent 3 days with. Teaching them's a little bit harder in a lot of ways. So you do an assessed session, and you get feedback from your coach, along with a short written assessment, which we now do online. And that's just like it's pretty much testing some of your understanding around the basics of coaching. So like there's questions in there about like safeguarding or like how you might teach a specific technique, etc. And then at the end of that, the final piece of development that you do is that you finish those 3 days and you go off and you have to complete 6 supervised sessions with a level 2. So from the feedback you get on those 3 days, you've then got some additional time to develop. And when you've got those 6 sessions signed off, that's you kind of over the line. In terms of the level 2, it's an interesting time to ask that question because I would say that we're looking at reviewing the way that's assessed. I don't know how much the content will change, so I can probably describe that. But the way in which we've currently done it since 2017 is it's a 4-day course with the assessments on the 5th day, right? There's lots of reasons why that works, and there's lots of reasons why that's problematic, all right? That's the picture of if we had the level 2 tomorrow, that's what you would do. And what happens on that 5th day is there's a competency test around technical and physical abilities. Obviously, at the moment, that really looks at people being a pretty substantial practitioner. So you'll do a series of sort of testing techniques, some sort of mental challenge, maybe around breaking jumps, and then a bunch of physical challenges to sort of demonstrate your ability to be involved in warm-ups and demonstrate fitness, etc. And then you'll do another coaching assessment. I think the consensus would be at the moment that the challenge around doing that on the 5th day is that you've not really had the time to absorb the learning, given how challenging the assessments are, right? So I would say that there I'm speaking from a view of what some of the members are feeding back to us at the moment, all right? My personal view doesn't come into it anymore. Um, so, and then that's it. What happens is you go away again. You do a bunch of supervised hours, but those are a little bit different because they're more like self-reflective hours. Okay, so off the top of my head, I can't remember the current number of hours, but I think it's something like 20. So you go away after you do that course, presuming you pass those assessments, and you then do about 20 sessions where you do a bit of self-reflection and write up, and you feed that back to the tutor, and that gives them a chance to sort of look at your development. Um, I think it's also worth chipping in with the way that it used to work, because I think we're probably going to end up somewhere in between, which is you did a 5-day course, you got a big bunch of feedback about what you had to work on, and then you came back a few months later and did the assessments that I've just described. So that was the way it used to work, and I guess the reason I'm mentioning both is because we are in a process of acknowledging that there's still a bit of like ambiguity there that we need to solve.
Yeah, so for mine, I did the course and then, yeah, I came back later on to do the assessments, if I remember. Or did I fail? So I failed my coaching part first, so I had to come back again and retake it. But I'm pretty sure the assessments were they part? I can't remember. I'd have to.
And when did you do that? What year?
It was 20. I want to say 2017.
Yeah. So my understanding of the history, because I've kind of dropped in and out of it over the years, is that 16, 17 was the sort of hazy period where there was a little bit of the assessments were getting looked at and changed, and so every course was a little bit different, I think, in that period. And then at end of 2017 or middle of 2017, someone's totally going to comment and correct this with the exact date. Was when we settled on this current system of like 4 days training, 1 day assessment. But like I said, we had our first ever, our first new workforce committee meeting today, and top of the agenda was how are we going to develop the level 2 to kind of meet that in the middle. Because yeah, I mean, you've had one experience coming and then going away and coming back, and some people have had the experience of doing it in 5 days, and both of those people have been successful or unsuccessful, right? So our job as Parkour UK is to try and make that a sort of it has to fit the framework, but also how that works and how that assessment works needs to be fit for purpose for the people that we want to be on our workforce. So yeah, bit of a state of flux at the moment.
And yeah, tell us a bit more about the current team at Parkour UK, because I know that it's changed quite a bit, and especially since I was doing my qualifications, yeah, there's been quite a few changes of hands. So yeah, tell us a bit about that.
So Eugene Minogue, which is the person that has been around for a long time and everyone knows Eugene Minogue. Yeah, exactly. Cheers to Eugene. I think I met Eugene in like 2007 or something like that. I don't know, right? So Eugene was the CEO for a number of years, and he's the person that took Parkour UK through the process of kind of starting, and also the recognition process, right, which was just a mountain. I don't even know how he did that, and he had support from people on the board. I don't want people to feel like I'm not name checking them or recognising them. Eugene resigned as CEO at the end. I need to get this timeline right because I always get it wrong. 2019 he resigned. All right, just kind of end of tenure, was moving on to other things, and I think we recognised the impact that he had was massive. And for a while, Parkour UK was kind of left in a bit of a hole there, I think, and not really sure what to do next. And then in July this year, after giving a bit of voluntary support, a new CEO was put in place, and that coincided with us getting £120,000 from Sport England. So for the first time, Parkour UK was able to have salaried positions. And I think that's a massive thing, because it's not to take away from the professionalism of anyone else, but people should get paid for the work they do where appropriate, right? And I think now what that's done is it's allowed Parkour UK to be able to recruit a team with a proper recruitment process of people who they would consider to be the right people for the job. I'm not going to say they're amazing, because I'm one of them, and that would be too much of me bigging it up. So what we now have today is we have a CEO in place, Dan Newton, who quite a lot of you have met, and absolutely to his credit, he's not a parkour practitioner, but has, I think from day one, he basically just got in his car and started going to meet people. So he's been really making an effort to listen to the community and connecting, and he's my boss, so I have to say that. And then you've got me, so I'm the development manager, and then we have Omar Jackson, who is from Spiral Freerun, now living in London, and he is the development coordinator. So Dan, I guess if we were going to describe the jobs quickly, Dan looks at all the top end strategy stuff, all the networking with Sport England, and he's also responsible for holding the board to account and vice versa. So he's the boss of the paid staff team. And then Omar and I's job is to work as a team on, I guess, a lot of things like this, talking to people, developing the national governing body, and then also just the kind of day-to-day generic development stuff. Like having a relationship with the different members, looking at the membership processes, pricing things, deciding on changes to the qualification. The list goes on. So we're now in a position that Parkour UK has never been in, which I guess is the short version of that story, where I would imagine that some of the people listening who are members that have communicated with us in the last month or two have seen a real difference in the culture change. And again, I don't think that's about reflecting poorly on the past. It's about saying there was one guy in place part-time and now we've got 3 staff. So we are really keen to kind of let people know there's a new culture at Parkour UK of just making sure that we take the time to serve everybody and listen, and give the best service that we can, particularly in regards to qualifications.
Yeah, and in mentioning Dan Newton, for those listening, I'm hoping to get Dan on the podcast at some point. So Dan, if you're listening, it would be great to have you on. I know that you've been traveling around the UK and talking to not just coaches and organisations, but individual practitioners as well, which is a real effort and really interesting. I think, Chris, you mentioned offline that you said that there's some interesting stories that have come out from this as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
It'd be good to talk to Dan about that. Yeah. And Omar as well, if he's available, that'd be great to talk to him too. And is there any differences in the different parts of the UK with kind of representatives?
That's a good question. So it's coming together a little bit. Like, obviously I'm champion in the north now because I'm based in Glasgow. So Parkour UK has always had elected directors for each country. There's no doubt that even just in terms of the population, like, there's a lot more gyms and a lot more coaching organisations in England. But now at the last board meeting, which was about a month ago, we now have an elected director in place for each of the countries again, which is great. And we are really conscious that, and this is not just the Scottish person in me speaking, but we're really conscious that I think in the past, partly to do with the demand and partly to do with where the staff have been based, a lot of the focus has been around that sort of south and southwest of England. The number of courses that have happened around London compared to, I don't know, Edinburgh or York is probably disproportionate to the practitioners. So we are looking at making sure we spread that out a bit. I think in a lot of ways the COVID thing sort of helped, because even our meetings now, like, you and I can just catch up. The geography of it isn't even in question. So immediately there is more inclusion of a lot of voices. If Parkour UK had an office, I probably wouldn't have been able to take this job, right? So, because I doubt it would have been in Glasgow, and the same with Omar. Dan's in Sheffield, so he's right in the middle. So I would say what we're finding is that that's starting to spread out again. I think, probably the same as me, Sam, like, you've got a fairly decent picture of who's around in the UK, but it's interesting now kind of sitting behind the Parkour UK emails and starting to see emails come in from areas that maybe I didn't have any idea there was people practicing, or there wasn't a gym there, so it's growing well.
Good. Well, it sounds really positive, and I think you're right about the pandemic in forcing us all to kind of interact, virtually a bit more, and the benefits from that and the connection from that. That's been one of the reasons why I've even started this podcast, is because
exactly, yeah.
there's this opportunity to talk to people and learn, really. And so how did the UK courses differ from what you know to other courses around the world, so more internationally speaking?
So I guess the content will differ to some extent, and I can't speak to the details of that, but I guess that's the obvious part, is that, as I said, I think our content, I mean, of course there's going to be crossover, right, because we're all teaching the same thing, but I think the content on ours is quite focused on this idea of really good coaching skills, and also thinking about making sure that the content speaks to a potentially diverse workforce, right? So some of the content will be good for people that are quite new to parkour, quite new to coaching, etc. And I guess, I mean, off the top of my head, I guess the sort of four that I can think of are us, WFPF, Parkour EDU, and Adapt. So they all differ a little bit. The only one I've got any experience with is Adapt, but from what I've heard, they're all pretty cool in their own right. I guess the distinction for us in the UK, and actually it's an easy one for us, is that we are a UK-based qualification, right? So we don't have any official recognition outside of that, nor are we particularly chasing that, because we're a national governing body that's focused in the UK. From what I understand about the other qualifications, I think one of the things that we are fortunate to have is that, like I said, we've fitted our qualification into a sort of existing legitimate framework that's recognised across the sports development sector. So I would say within the UK, that's probably something we can put our stamp on. And again, that's not to critique the other ones. I think they've went down different avenues. So that's definitely a distinction. Like I said, in terms of the actual content, I can't speak too much to the difference, but I mean, I've generally heard positive things about all of them, and I think it's cool to see that over the years that 4 or 5 different ones have developed, and I think we don't know when this is going to be yet, but we'd like to have a qualifications ecosystem consultation down the line, which one of the questions in that will be around what does the community think about the fact that essentially there's a sort of marketplace at the moment. Like, how do we... I don't have an answer to how or why we fit into that, and I actually don't think it's our job to answer that. I think it's the community's answer, right? So whenever we have that consultation, we'll discuss the current state of our qualifications and what maybe needs to change there. And then I think also, like you've just said, interesting to hear from the community, what do they perceive as the distinctions, and what's the value in having more than one offer out there? I don't know the answer to that yet, which is quite exciting.
And are there... I know you mentioned about different kind of age groups and the kind of diversity of coaches and coaching. What other courses do you offer? Because am I right in saying that you're offering like a coaching for elderly people sometime this winter and things like that?
So there was a bunch of CPDs on the website for a while. At the moment, we've just taken them off, and that's not to say they're cancelled, but again, I think that's just because we're in this sort of state of flux, and we want to make sure that we understand what it is that we're saying that we deliver. But the short answer is yes, and that we would really like to be able to offer a sort of bunch of CPD across the board. And I think a good way to think about it is that so things like Parkour for the elderly, a focus on mental health, a focus on young people, maybe a focus on working with people with disabilities or other barriers to participation. I think that's all been in there on and off over the years. But again, I think what we'd like to do to get that right is 2 things. The first one is to make sure that we line that up with experts, right? Because we are only the parkour experts, and I think that's really important, is that it's very easy for us to exist in that echo chamber, but the reality is that there's not a huge amount of parkour coaches out there who are disability experts, for example, or mental health experts. You know, there are, but not everyone. So I think whenever we sort of reinstate those CPDs, we'll do that in a way that makes sure they're very sort of thorough and legitimate. And a good way to think about it is that there'll be a sort of horizontal line where we're thinking you become a level 1, that's the beginning of your journey, and I guess there'll be a bunch of potential bolt-ons around that. So you could be a level 1, but you could also go and do your working with old people, mental health, etc. And then there's also that sort of more vertical progression, which is like into the level 2 and then potentially the tutor. And then the second thing there, I think, is that we'd like to know what people would like to be on that suite of offers. I think that's crucial. So I know I'm totally banging the drum here about hearing from people, but you know, I'm taking the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, well, for people listening, I mean, this is another reason I wanted to get you on. I want people to communicate more, and this is a chance to, you know, if you have opinions, if you have ideas, if you have thoughts about the system in place in the UK and how we coach and what you'd like to see from, you know, qualifications and things, then please get in touch with myself, with Chris, with Parkour UK. Then that's all good stuff. So yeah, go on.
And yeah, I just think just to sort of mirror that back is just like, this is the time to do it. So we're really in this window of like, the message Parkour UK is putting out right now to members and to non-members. I think it's crucial to say at this point, if you want to have an opinion right now, fantastic, come and have it. Like, obviously we'd like to bring you into our membership, but that's not a closed door in terms of you telling us what you think. But between now and the end of the year and coming into next year is when we're really going to reshape those qualifications, and I think it's about the community shaping it, rather than us. And I cannot stress enough how important that is to me personally as well, that having worked outside of parkour for a few years and come back, that we are all a little bit guilty of our own echo chamber, including myself, and that I think the more that we're asking people in and out of the discipline, the better an offer we'll come up with. So yeah, please get involved.
Cool. Yeah, and if you're listening on Spotify, if you're watching on YouTube, then the link should be for Chris and for Parkour UK. There should be around the general screen area somewhere, so you can go and find them. So moving on a little bit away from the sort of the intricacies of the system in a way. What I wanted to talk to you about your own opinions on coaching. So one of my questions was, what do you think the common attributes are of the very top tier coaches? What do they display that really sets them apart, and what essentially we should, as coaches, aspire to?
So I think something I said right at the beginning is one of the things that sets them apart is a real recognition that coaching is its own skill. So coaching parkour is a skill, doing parkour is a skill, but also coaching is a skill, right? So I think the really good practitioners or the really good coaches, are spending time on that skill, whether that's through doing qualifications or their own study, but they are looking outside of the parkour aspect of that and thinking, what makes me a good communicator, what makes me a good teacher? And again, that sort of drives straight into my second thing, which would be about humility, right? That people know there's always more to learn. You don't know what you don't know, right? So I've definitely found that the people who are very good also don't necessarily think they're that good, because they understand that there's a realm that they're part of, but they're only a part of it, and they've got lots to do. I think just in terms of personalities, like, it's actually, I used to have quite a generic answer for that, but I think actually it's quite varied, right? But I guess, people that tend to be patient, be quite open and approachable, and I think approachable is a tricky one, because like, I'm approachable because I'm kind of big and loud and smiley, but other people are approachable because they're kind of chill and quiet, right? And then I think just what you really see in good coaches is that whatever practice they have, they're also driving that as well, right? So they tend to be good role models within the practices and the practices around theirs. They're people that are living the discipline. And I wouldn't say that's exclusive, but most of the ones that I think we see have that, they are practicing as well. Other than that, I think the really good ones are also the people that haven't just done one thing. I think that's crucial as well. So again, I feel like I'm repeating myself about this echo chamber idea, but people who've maybe done other things other than parkour, they just have stuff to bring to it. And the reason I bring that up quite regularly is because I think when I kind of moved on from doing parkour full time, I didn't recognise that until I did other stuff, that like, actually, it's easy to be an expert in your own realm to some extent. And so it's really cool if people are doing maybe 5 or 6 other things, or people are coming from different backgrounds.
Absolutely. I think, so for me, being a sort of full-time coach, I teach mainly children, and I've poured loads of time and effort into trying to get better at teaching kids. And then when I was approached by the university in York to teach their society, it was kind of like, even though they're closer to my age, it was like throwing me in the deep end again, because you get so used to the way your persona as a coach, the way that you address the kids, the way that you help them, the way that you teach them. So yeah, I think you're right as well about humility, and that there should always be something that you're reaching to get. There should be a thought in your head of, how can I improve? How did that session go? How can I improve? What could I have done differently with even the way I speak, or the way that I taught something, or the way I structured the class? And I think structure is something that isn't really talked about a huge amount. I know that in the courses it is kind of mentioned, But for you, what do you think a good parkour session looks like, and what have you found actually is beneficial? What works for you?
Yeah, so I think like the generic answer is you do a warm up, you do a class, and you do a cool down, right? So we'll just move that out of the way. So there's the sort of like the basic framework of keeping someone safe and healthy in a class. Let's assume that we've answered that, right? I think for me, the thing that I've always said, and actually I've done a lot of coach education outside of parkour now, and the thing that I always say to people about any workshop is it needs to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? And I know that sounds really ambiguous, but for me, any workshop is like you're presenting an idea to people, you're creating a space where they can learn it, and then you're bringing it to a conclusion where they do learn it and they can reflect on it, right? So, and it's amazing how even though that seems an incredibly easy and obvious narrative, that actually people don't do that, right? So maybe a counter example would be you decide that you want to teach people 5 vaults, right? So I'm just making this up. You go into the class, you say, here are the 5 vaults, you do them in a row, and then you go, oh, okay, guys, 5 o'clock, thanks, that was good, right? That's very different from starting a class by having a conversation about what are vaults for. This is why we might review them, putting those 5 movements in there, thinking about what it means to now know how to do them, and then how you put them together, and then reflecting on what's happened over the session, right? So, and I think that's that thing. Do you remember when like you were at school and you were told for an essay, like you tell them what you're going to tell them, then you tell them, and then you tell them what you just told them, right? That was the way my mum used to describe essays to me, right? I think a good lesson and a good structure of a lesson is like that. There's a narrative to it. It has a beginning and an end. And the reason I bring that up as my example is because I think people do trip up on that. I've seen a lot in when I've been helping facilitators or coaches learn in and out of parkour that what they do is convey the content. They don't tell a story, right? And that you say, right, you've got a 20-minute session to teach people this. I'm going to give you some feedback at the end. And they basically just keep talking about the subject until it hits 20 minutes and then they go, cool. You know, and I think there's that thing about your learners need to go through a story arc or a narrative in the lesson, whether they know it or not, that brings it into a really good, rich learning place and then out of a reflecting place at the end so that they're left with something to look back on.
And if we take a step back and think of a block of sessions, so for example, I teach in accordance with the term times, so I teach 2 kind of 7-week blocks with a half term in the middle. That's something that's challenged me to think, especially because I'm kind of by myself in York. There's not really much help, so I've had to kind of think it through myself. But I've been trying to think, how do I structure a block of sessions? And I guess in a similar way that you said about having an arc, I've tried to think about what are the things, the fundamentals that by the end they should have at least some experience or awareness of, and also how do they get there, and what do we teach? So what what do you think about that? How do you think of sessions in consecutive kind of order?
Yeah, so I guess the short answer is like you said, it's an extension of what I described, right? Because also that idea of like the sort of arc, that can happen 5 times in one lesson as well, right? So there's micro and macro levels to that, and I appreciate there's a lot of nuance in that, and that's why we're here, right? But I think there's a few things for me. So I think one of the things that you said is there is probably a need to just kind of do the slightly sanitized, what do I think that I want them to learn, right? And I don't know, pick 5 things, whatever. So there's probably like a few genuine physical techniques that you want them to learn. So there's that sort of stuff. But then there's also what are the ideas that you want them to learn, right? And realistically, as a parkour practitioner, what we're teaching people is an idea and an approach, right? So for me, that almost has to come first. And again, if we're getting like super nuanced and meta, right? Again, as a parkour practitioner, you would say it's not really the jump that's important, it's the journey of doing the jump that's important, right? So I think considering that and what that looks like after 8 weeks is really important. Like, are they going to come away saying that they have learned specific techniques, or are they going to come away changed, right? Are they going to come away having said, I feel more confident, I understand my body, I now have a different view of my place in the world, right? And personally, for me, that's that's where my values align to when I teach stuff, and I think that's also because a lot of the parkour work I've done is focused around, like community work in theatre and things where you're part of a wider intervention in a community and you're trying to change people's attitudes. But the reason parkour works in those environments so well is because that's what it does. So I think you need to look at both those things. So there's like the sort of generic tick the box of like, kind of probably want them to know how to jump and roll and like a few vaults, but actually what you want them to tell you at the end is that they feel different, I think. And then I think the last thing I would say there is that what you think your students have learned and what they feel they have learned needs to align, and that's quite hard, right, as a coach, right? So there's always that question of like when you're designing that arc, as you do it, checking in with your students as you go and asking them at the end of the session, what did you think, right? So if I said to you, say I was teaching you a jump, and I said, did you learn a jump? I've closed that question off. I've asked you what I wanted you to learn, right? Whereas if I say, what did you think of that session? And they say, it was great, I feel really confident, then you can go, okay, so that's what's valuable to the learner, right? And then again, these things it's all nuanced, right? They all interplay and it's really fluid. And actually, as you can probably see, that's what lights up a good coach, right? Is this playing with all those things. And then I think, hopefully that makes sense, it's all quite existential. But the final thing for me, which I think parkour people can be quite poor at, hope nobody takes offence to this, is just good benchmarking, right? If you're training for 8 weeks, it's good to know that there was a thing that you tried on week 1 that you try again in week 8 that you can now do, right? So that comes back to that slightly sanitized box ticking exercise, right? But so for example, if I was designing a lesson for 8 weeks, I might do a super loose lesson on week 1, but set up a course that I'm going to use again in week 8. And so then there's an opportunity on week 8 to be like, guys, we actually looked at all this on week 1, but you didn't really know what to do, and now you do. So I think you've got that to play with as well. That is so much to think about. I'm sorry.
Please don't apologise. That's exactly what I want, and something that I've been trying to figure out how to like get out of coaches is actually some of the more nuanced stuff, because it's easy to say, oh well, what do you do as a coach? Well, we teach how to jump, we teach how to vault, but I really like that actually that you're talking more about, how do the participants feel? How do they develop? What do they learn? How does it change them?
Yeah.
And
And like how think about how you would describe that to someone about how you value your own practice, right? You wouldn't, if someone said, what do you get out of parkour? You're not going to say, well, I can jump, right? You're going to say, well, I don't know, I've got more confidence, I feel better, I've got a new sense of community with the people I connect with, So the things that you get out of it are not necessarily tangible. And I think that we need to remember that as coaches, is that actually, and again, that reflects back to the accessibility point, that if we measure people's success by what techniques they can do, then we are totally missing the point, right? And so it's really good that you're thinking about that. And I think it's a good challenge to get a coach to say, describe the things you want people to learn, but you're not allowed to describe any movements, right? So they're not allowed to say, well, I'm going to teach them 3 vaults and I'm going to set up 5 different jumps and I think they should know rail positions. We kind of know that you're going to do that. So what are they actually going to come out of it? And for me, it's that thing about change and transformation, that you build on something. And then I think this is also my total youth worker bias, right? All this stuff. But I think that is a gift that people can take with them, right? So if someone learns to jump 2 meters and then they break their leg the week after, there's nothing they can do with their parkour practice unless they've also built their confidence and their understanding on their friends group, right? So actually what you're giving them has nothing to do with the movement. It's almost a byproduct in a lot of ways.
And so take kids classes, for example. One thing that I wrestle with is how much speaking, how much talking and how much moving, because I have a 55-minute session, which sounds weird, but I have 5 minutes to change into the next session. 55-minute session, have warm up, technical pieces, maybe some strength work and some reflection and stuff like that. One thing I wrestle with is how much to talk and explain, because obviously they come into the studio, they're raring to go, they want to move, they're excited, and so do you have any tips on that sort of thing, and kind of maybe when is the best chance, when is the best time to talk and explain certain concepts? Um, yeah.
Yeah, great question. I think first of all, I talk a lot, and actually, it's interesting because in the coaching environment, I managed to rein it in. But I think again, it's to some extent it depends on your who you're teaching, right? But if it's younger people, I think they don't learn by hearing things. I think it's a total myth, right? Like, without getting on a high horse, like we all know that there's challenges with the general education system. The other thing is that if they're coming to you, they probably have been talked at for most of the day already, right? So being a contrast to that is an immediate hook for a young person, right? And again, I'm not knocking teachers, like they have to do what they have to do and they do it their way, but the reality, especially if it's an after school club, they've sat down and had been talked at for most of the day, right? So there's something for me about not much of it goes in by explanation, in my opinion, or certainly in my experience. And again, any of these conversations that are outliers to that, right? But for me, it's about getting people moving and then getting them good at the process of reflecting. And you can do that with young people, right? And that's a huge maturity development step for them as well, right? So what I would tend to do with young people is, again, putting aside anything we need to put in place just to get their attention and the behavioural type stuff, I think I tend to get them moving very quickly. The rule that I used to sort of follow when I was sort of supporting some of the coaches in my team in my old job or anywhere else was, don't ever have more than 3 things to say about a movement when you start, because that's quite a lot of information to absorb, right? So if you're teaching a person a specific movement, like if that's the angle of your lesson, to say it was, I don't know, a step vault, I would tend to just be like, put your hand here, the other leg goes there, and you've got to get through. That's enough, right? Because they'll try it, and if you need to help them, you can help them, right? But I think there's something about the sort of questioning of the interaction of your students should be around questions and getting an understanding of what they think about stuff. So how did that feel is a much better question than a much better thing than put your leg here instead. And then what you're actually teaching them is the process of reflecting, right? And then I would say and I tend to do probably most of that talking not as a group. So that'll be those little 5-second interactions you have when you're supervising. And then obviously, like, general coaching rule, if you find there's a theme, there's maybe an opportunity to stop and address the group and say, how did everyone feel? So one of the ways that I teach landing, for example, I always set it up, and then my first question when we stop is, what was hard about that? Right? Which means you're not telling the people that you think about what they might be doing wrong. You're asking young people to look at themselves and go, what did I find difficult about that? And I think that's a totally different relationship from being like, by the way, you put your foot in the wrong place. Yeah. So for me, there's something about that is don't explain too much. Ask questions, allow them to have the dialogue. And I think behind all of that is just this sense that if young people in particular feel that they have agency, as in they have space to behave and act in the way that they think is appropriate within the right boundaries, you are going to be more engaged with them, and that's when the learning happens. So, the youth class that I used to run, we had such a great relationship with those young people that we could sit down and talk about jumps for 20 minutes. But I'd say that was after quite a long period of time of building those relationships. Yeah. And it is that thing of understanding that how you learned it is probably not how they're going to learn it.
For sure. Yeah. And I'd say on that point, there is a kind of an age, there's an age factor in there, because with my older group of kids who are 12 to sort of 15, 16, we've got to a nice point now where they're all fairly competent, they're all pretty interested, and we can stop and talk about certain things. And also, if there's something that's not in my plan for the session that one of them's really keen to do, or some of them are really excited about, then we're at the place now where we have that kind of mutual respect and understanding that, okay, yeah, let's move this here, let's try that, and let's spend some time on this, and that for me is like coming towards this big kind of tipping point where essentially they can fly the nest and train by themselves and learn to train. Something that I've actually got a level 1 with me at the moment, Hector, shout out Hector, and he's very big on teaching, especially for kind of maybe older or late teenage kind of participants, how to train essentially. So how to communicate with your local community when you go back home for Christmas. How to navigate people seeing you on the street doing what you're doing and things like that. And I think all that is really enriching as well.
Yeah, it's the qualities that you're trying to teach people, right? It comes back to what we were talking about 10 minutes ago. Like, the movement is incidental is the wrong word, but it's not. Yeah, I think that's an important focus. And listen, I think the other side of that is that you can teach people anything if you build the relationship well and it's met with the right enthusiasm. Like the adult classes I used to run, on the right day with the right people, we could talk about climb up technique for like half an hour, right? Because it's delivered by people who are like super up for taking a deep dive on that, and it's delivered by a coach who clearly is like, wants to talk about that stuff. And I guess it's just about finding that line, like you said, like when the relationship is in the right place, that'll work really well. And really that comes back to the fundamentals of coaching, right? As your job is to build good relationships with people so that they've kind of got the space to learn. It's not about emitting knowledge that they will absorb, and I think that what you described there is a perfect example of that. You start with a group of people where your original job is to engage them. Maybe they'll learn a few things in the first few weeks, which is great because then they want to stay. But once you have a relationship which is balanced, so there's no position of authority unless it's necessary, I think people are in a really good position to learn.
Absolutely. So we're closing in on our time actually, and that has been absolutely jam packed. So firstly, huge thank you, Chris. That was a lot of really, really useful info and insight in there for people. So if you are listening to this and you roll on to the next one, my last talk was with Posey Brown, who's a practitioner from London, a female practitioner, and she shared her kind of insight into her kind of start of coaching. She's just starting her journey of coaching. That was really interesting to hear.
I started that one a couple of days ago. It's good.
Oh, nice. Thank you. So shouts to Posey. Again, it'd be great to have more of the Parkour UK team on board. Dan and Omar, and anyone else that feels they want to get involved. But yeah, I guess we're kind of at the end. Is there anything else you want to mention, shout out, plug, anything like that before we leave?
I guess the first thing is thank you. Thanks for having me involved. It's really nice. It's good fun to just chat about this stuff. And I think also just because I know some of the people will be listening, the last few weeks in this new job, I've been so welcomed in by a lot of the members that I've sort of had various relationships with over the years. So like shout out to just everyone that's involved in Parkour UK directly and non-directly, that like people are getting on board with the wheels turning really fast now, and that's super exciting. It's made my job a lot easier. And then I guess the only thing I want to plug is that, I kept saying about how we're trying to listen to everyone. Well, we just had a consultation recently with our sort of coaching and gyms community. The first two parts of that are now, maybe the first part or not the first two parts, is now on YouTube and on our socials. So we had 2 presentations and then a bunch of discussion. We're doing more of those consultations. Please keep an eye on the socials and the website. And I'm going to regret saying this, but you can also just email me and ask me, and I will answer. I've said that now. I'll message you tomorrow, Sam, with like far too many emails. But yeah, please just contact us and ask. I guess that's my big message, because I know in the past that's maybe not been very effective, but it will be. You getting shy and someone off? No, you're fine.
Well, my housemate is just coming. It's all right.
All good.
All good.
All right, cool. Well, thank you again so much, Chris. That was really, really insightful. Like I said before, if you want to find out anything more from Chris, Parkour UK, from me, all the links will be around the screen somewhere. Go and look for them; they'll be there. And yeah, if you enjoyed this, if you enjoy listening to this, then you can comment on YouTube. You can't comment on Spotify. You can follow on Spotify. You can subscribe on YouTube and share it around, because I'm trying to get more people involved and more conversation going. So from me, thank you, and thank you again, Chris. See you later.
Thank you. Goodbye. Was that the official goodbye, or are we just hanging up now?